failure is one of those topics that can be a little tough. You know, it makes us feel uncomfortable, even though it's a normal fact of life. You can't get through a day, really, probably without experiencing some tiny bit of failure, but it's still not that easy to deal with. However, there are some wonderful opportunities to learn, grow, and improve if we're able to get over the embarrassment of our failures and can look for the lessons that lie within them. So that's kind of what we're about today. We want to look at how to reframe failure, and so that we can use those failures to propel us forward and continue to do well. So this is a fellow who is an economist. He's British, so we're going to listen to him speak in just a minute. But his name is Tim Hartford. He has a column in the Financial Times, which is a London newspaper. He's syndicated on the website slate.com. His latest book is there in the corner. It's called Adapt: Why Success Always Starts with Failure. And his main thesis of this book is that the world is changing so quickly that it's really impossible to try to plan every move in your business. So a better approach, given the rapid pace of things these days, is to be able to integrate the ability to bounce back from failure and to be nimble. So here's a quick little video of his philosophy.
For the last 3 years, I've been thinking about failure, which sounds like a pretty depressing way to spend 3 years. It hasn't been. Failure is everywhere, and it's fascinating. Most importantly, understanding failure is the key to understanding success. So let me give you 3 principles for failing productively, and I'll rely on 3 very different examples. One of the world's most dynamic companies, the strategy of the US military in Iraq, and a cutting-edge choreographer. First principle is, be willing to fail a lot. Google's quite conscious about this strategy. The company asks every engineer to spend 1 day a week working on any project that's caught his or her attention. These projects have produced products such as AdSense, which accounts for a huge chunk of Google's revenues, and Google News. Of course, there are also stinkers, such as Google Wave or Android 1.0. The point is, Google doesn't know what will work unless it's willing to try and fail. When President Bush and Donald Rumsfeld sent the US Army into Iraq, they weren't prepared to fail, couldn't even imagine failure. And that brings us to principle number 2. Make sure your new ventures are on a scale where failure is survivable. The American Army went into Iraq with their leaders convinced they'd got the right strategy first time. Internal dissent was suppressed, constructive critics were ignored and sidelined. Anyone who tried a different approach was slapped down. That strategy was one big failure, micromanaged from the top. When change came, it came first from the bottom, from a brave group of colonels who defied the top generals and tried new approaches anyway. It took a bottom-up revolution before the US Army adapted despite itself and turned Iraq around. If principle 1 is be willing to fail a lot, and principle 2 is fail on a survivable scale, one of America's top choreographers, Twyla Tharp, knows all about that. She says she spends 3 hours a day filming dance improvisation, and she's happy if that produces 30 seconds of usable material, and this process is emblematic of her approach to our final example. When she adapted Billy Joel's hits for the musical Moving Out, she first put the show on in Chicago 3 months before the Broadway debut. It gave her time to recover if it was a failure, which it was. Reviewers panned the show. And that brings us to principle number 3. Make sure you have what it takes to spot a failure and fix it early. It would have been easy for Twyla Tharp, as a celebrated, established choreographer, to insist the reviewers were wrong and stubbornly take the same show to Broadway. She didn't. She swallowed her pride, cut characters, changed the staging, nursed her team's bruised egos, and opened on Broadway to stunning reviews and Tony Awards. Of course, we're all offered platitudes about try again, or learn from your mistakes. This simply isn't human nature. We're frightened of failure and ashamed to admit it when we do fail. That's a big mistake. We should risk failure and face up to it when it happens, because only then can we adapt.
All right, well, he has an interesting approach and some suggestions on how to be prepared to react to failure and recover from it. Recently, in the last several years, there has been an attempt to kind of study failure almost from a scientific perspective and understand it better. And some of these attempts include a conference that is held annually. Last October, they had their third annual FailCon conference in Silicon Valley, and that's attended by mostly tech businesses. And what they do is people from those companies stand up and share where things went wrong, and then they talked about how they fixed it. So there's a whole conference built around, what do we do when things don't work out? There's a failure journal, which is that screenshot up at the top, so you can actually stay up to date monthly on what's going on in the area of failure. And that little logo at the bottom, the Institute of Brilliant Failures, is a real place. It's located in Holland, and it is a think tank that was started by a bank in Holland so that business failures could be studied and learned from. So some of the leading business thinkers today are actually writing books about failure, and these are just some examples of some of them. We're going to talk a little bit about Paul Shoemaker's ideas on failure a little later, and there are a couple of other authors there. The main idea of all of those books is how you can turn failure into an advantage. So it's a nice way to reframe the problem. How many of you ever saw Harley Davidson perfume or cologne on the shelves of your favorite store? Or designer water for your pets? How about the famous toaster eggs? Okay, these are three products that never really performed well and didn't last in the marketplace very long. In fact, there is an entire museum of failure, and this is a snapshot of that museum. It's located in the central Northwest, I think Minnesota or Michigan, and it was actually started in the 60s by an advertising guy who was in the consumer product markets area. And he started tracking all these products that, didn't make it to market. And it turns out that's true for almost every new product. There's just a small percentage that actually succeed. And now this museum is kind of a mecca for consumer product folks to go and study and figure out, what went wrong and what can we learn from it. So it's a vast collection and always growing. So when things happen that we have to count as mistakes and things that, catch us by surprise that we aren't prepared for and we're not very happy about, what's a good way to respond? If you can step back and think of a different way to view the issue. So one way to think about failure would be just as time-released success. So it's the first step on your path to success. Even though things have fallen apart and you're like totally upset about it, it's really only part of the process. So there's more that you can do to recover from that. So mistakes are just part of life, and they're actually blessings in disguise, because Mistakes help us to rethink, reevaluate, and then in that process we can improve on what we first started out to do. If the mistake is a shocker, it can take us in a totally new direction, which may be much better than our original plan. So here are screenshots of 6 different businesses that have experienced some major failures, and I'm wondering if you can identify the business. Some of them are pretty obvious because their names are real big there, but anyone know what happened with Dell up there and why their profit margin hit the ground? It was the failure to respond to the PCs. So that was a while back. They started out as having desktop sets, and they, when the PCs and laptops came onto the market, they just, didn't respond quickly enough to keep their profit margins up. The next one over at the top of the screen is from the business Toys R Us, and they failed to respond to a competitor they didn't see coming, and that was Amazon. They were not positioned to market digitally and do internet sales, so that really affected their bottom line. Can anybody guess what that middle picture with the little girl represents? That's a good guess. It actually is Blockbuster, but same idea. Same idea. So who did Blockbuster in? Sorry?
I used to do Blockbuster.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm sorry, I didn't speak loudly enough. Anybody know what did Blockbuster in?
Redbox.
Yeah, Redbox and Netflix also. So they weren't able to, they didn't keep innovating in their business, and their competitors came in with a better model, and the customers went towards the competitors. Sun Microsystems was a big deal for a long time, but they are no longer in business. Anybody know what happened there? They weren't able to shift. Their big product were servers, but with the shift into the cloud technology, server business fell off. So they did not have a game plan to deal with that. Yahoo, they're attempting to recover now, but they really became a second tier web browser to Google. And the reason that happened is that they didn't adapt to mobile technology or to social media. So they just kind of stayed in place, and you can't really afford to do that when you've got lots of innovators in your market. And then the last one was is Sears. And any guesses what is going on with Sears, why things aren't going so well for them? They merged with Kmart. No, that's right. So they had some missteps there in terms of alignment. What about who is Sears' primary market? What kind of person? They're, in terms of their customers, it's really the middle class, and it has been since they started. And what's going on with the middle class these days? They're shopping online, that's a big one. And also their numbers are shrinking. So Sears, is in trouble as a result. This is a quote from a commencement speech that was delivered to graduates at Harvard back in 2008. And I'm going to read you just a section of this, a brief section of the speech, and at the end, maybe you can guess who gave it. By any conventional measure, a mere 7 years after my graduation day, I had failed on an epic scale. An exceptionally short-lived marriage had imploded. I was jobless, a lone parent, and as poor as it is possible to be in modern Britain without being homeless. The fears my parents had had for me and that I had had for myself had both come to pass. And by every usual standard, I was the biggest failure I knew. Why do I talk about the benefits of failure? Simply because failure meant a stripping away of the inessential. I stopped pretending to myself that I was anything other than what I was, and began to direct all my energy into finishing the only work that mattered to me. Had I really succeeded at anything else, I might never have found the determination to succeed in the one arena I truly believed I belonged. I was set free because my greatest fear had already been realized, and I was still alive, and I still had a daughter I adored, and I had an old typewriter and a big idea. And so, rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I rebuilt my life. Any guesses who gave that speech? Rowling. Very good. Yeah, J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter series. So, these are a series of people who became wildly successful, but probably partly at least because of some early failures. Does anyone recognize this artist? This is Jackson Pollock, and if you're familiar with his work, he kind of revolutionized the art world with his splatter paintings. So they're very abstract, and the way that he started working with that splattered paint technique is because he couldn't afford traditional oil paints. He was too broke. So he took a different kind of paint and watered it down, and that's how he got that effect. So that was how he and I think his art is, I'm not sure if this is still true, but at one time his work was brought the highest price of any artist on the planet. So this guy invented the world's most effective antibiotic. Anybody know what the antibiotic is? Penicillin. Very good. His name's Alexander Fleming. He's obviously a scientist. And he discovered penicillin by being a little bit sloppy. So he kind of tolerated some messiness in his lab because he thought that introduction of sort of accidental chaos might help lead to some discoveries that they couldn't plan for. And sure enough, it led to the discovery of penicillin. Some spores came in through a window and landed on a petri dish, and it turned out that when they interacted with whatever was in the petri dish, it was penicillin. Anybody know this guy? It's a holiday named after him. Yeah, Christopher Columbus. So, and you know his story that he started out not to find the New World, but to get to the Far East for the spice trade. So his original plan, I guess you could say it backfired, but boy did it pay dividends when it actually, the way that it actually worked out. So this is a video. It's based on a book called 10 Accidental Discoveries, and it's from a book called Famous Happy Accidents. And these are inventions that we use every day now that weren't really intended to be discovered when people started working on them. There is one product here that it might be slightly PG rated, but hopefully you can handle it. So mistakes aren't always bad things. Sometimes they can actually lead to some great business opportunities. We looked at Paul Shoemaker's book when we first got started. He's the research director of the Mack Institute for Innovation at the Wharton School of Business. And his book, Brilliant Mistakes, is an interesting read. And his take on mistakes is really interesting. He said his attitude is that when mistakes happen, the company paid for them, and so the company owns them. And since then you can look at mistakes as an asset, you can start to see where the opportunities lie. So as a business owner, you can really take advantage of your mistakes and use them to move you forward. Scientific companies and tech companies have been doing this for a long time, and they actually build trial and error into their business models and strategies. This is something every business can do. So here are a few common mistakes that happen, and these are mistakes that you can recover from. And we're going to take a look at them in a little more depth in a minute here, but one of them is a failure to specialize or to define a unique place in your market. Another one is not pricing your product or service correctly. Another one is ignoring your customer, not knowing what their wishes and demands might be. A failure to adapt to change in the business landscape, failing to innovate when things all around you and your competitors are out there making changes that affect how your product is received in the market, and then failure to track the bottom line. So in creating a niche in your marketplace. We have an example here of a business that started out really well by defining a niche back in the 70s and 80s. Probably no one else in here is old enough to remember this business. Any guesses on who the sneaker company is? LA Gear. So LA Gear was the first, and you can see it's kind of a, what was that movie, that dance movie?
Splash Dance?
Yeah, Flash Dance. Yeah, close. So it's kind of a flash dance era photograph there. But LA Gear was the first sneaker company to specialize in basketball shoes, and they made a bundle doing that. But as their business matured, they kind of drifted away from that core speciality, and they started going into different areas. They started selling started selling into Walmart, and that devalued their product. People didn't think of it as being a luxury product any longer since it was available at Walmart. And they also went into areas outside basketball shoes. So that was a failure. And I don't know if they're in business any longer. It's been a long time since I've seen a pair of LA shoes, but you used to be able to find them everywhere. The fellow under the Win box is the CEO of a company called Dollar Shave, and how many of you have seen this video? It's like viral on YouTube, yeah. So the thing that is interesting about his company is that, you know, razor blades are kind of as dull, well, sorry for the pun. it's not a particularly intriguing and dynamic new product. I mean, the marketplace is pretty well saturated. But he found a way to create a niche for his product through marketing and product delivery. And we'll just show you the video for those of you that haven't seen it.
Hi, I'm Mike, founder of DollarShaveClub.com. What is DollarShaveClub.com? Well, for $1 a month, we send high-quality razors right to your door. Yeah, $1. Are the blades any good? No. Our blades are f***ing great. Each razor has stainless steel blades, an aloe vera lubricating strip, and a pivot head. It's so gentle a toddler could use it. And do you like spending $20 a month on brand name razors? 19 go to Roger Federer. I'm good at tennis. And do you think your razor needs a vibrating handle, a flashlight, a back scratcher, and 10 blades? Your handsome-ass grandfather had 1 blade and polio. Looking good, pop up! Stop paying for shave tech you don't need. And stop forgetting to buy your blades every month. Alejandro and I are going to ship them right to you. We're not just selling razors, we're also making new jobs. Alejandro, what were you doing last month?
Not working.
What are you doing now?
Working.
I'm no Vanderbilt, but this train makes hay. So stop forgetting to buy your blades every month and start deciding where you're going to stack all those dollar bills I'm saving you. We are DollarShaveClub.com, and the party is on.
All right, so Dollar Shave Club is going gangbusters. Another common point of failure is not getting the price correct on your product or your service. And Netflix went through this a couple years back. Anybody remember what happened? They tried to raise their prices in response to tech innovation, streaming, online streaming. So in trying to shift from, delivery of the DVDs to online streaming, they ran into some issues with their providers because their internet providers started upping the price because they saw an opportunity to get more money. And Netflix didn't handle that price increase very well with their customers, and it made them mad. So that was a misstep there. Have any of you seen the Zipcars down in Denver? And yeah, so Zipcar actually also messed up when they initially priced their cars. It was a brand new concept, and they weren't quite sure how to price the rental of the Zipcar, and they didn't do it right. But what they did do right was recover from that. So they figured their prices, but they were really good about communicating what they were doing and the reason behind it to their customers, and they didn't lose customers because customers understood. So that key communication about the change in pricing really saved them.
Didn't
Yes.
Netflix do the same thing? They recovered and repriced?
They did, yes, absolutely.
Put them in the value box?
They failed at first, but you are correct, they did recover. So they could go in the success box. Yeah, absolutely. So knowing your customer is obviously critical if you're going to be successful in business. And under the fail box there is an old-time cigarette company, R.J. Reynolds, and this happened way back in the 60s. But they spent, and at that time, this was a huge investment. They spent over $1 billion trying to come up with a smokeless cigarette. But the one thing that they neglected to do was test it with customers. So they invested this huge amount of money into this product that was supposed to be, the next big thing, because at that time the tobacco companies were starting to get a lot of heat for smoke, for their product, and so they thought a smokeless cigarette was the antidote. But the customers hated it and they rejected it. So that was a big point of failure. Anybody recognize the manufacturer of these earbuds under the win column? It's a company called Skull Candy, and they kind of did the opposite. Their market are really skateboarders and surfers. And so that's who they started selling to, and they really understood their customer. They knew their culture, they knew their likes and their dislikes, they knew the music they liked to listen to, they knew the clothes they liked to wear, and so all of that went into the design of their product, and they are highly successful. They're sold all over the world. So the ability to adapt is really important in the business world, and you know, there are probably lots of examples of businesses that don't jump that chasm when things start to change. And the Motorola Razr phone, anybody remember that one? Yeah. What happened with the Razr phone? Anybody know? The iPhone, the smartphone came in and just, it was a whole new level of communication device, and Motorola, you know, had nothing to counteract that phenomenon with. Samsung, on the other hand, looked at what Apple had done with the iPhone and immediately teamed up with Google, created the Android platform, and now I believe they have overtaken the iPhone. So they were able to capitalize on change in technology. Probably everybody knows the story of Kodak film and how once, you know, great, highly profitable business just did not adapt to the world of digital photography. And that's, you know, sad to see a grand old company like that go by the wayside. How many of you have or know about the Nest thermostat? Cool. Yeah, this is, we have a little video for those of you that don't know about it, but it's an innovative take on the thermostat. The iPhone, the folks that created the Nest thermostat used some smart technology, made it easy for consumers to use, and then the other bit of innovation they did is that the thermostat learns from you as you use it, so that's pretty. Okay. Now, if you don't pay attention, bottom line, obviously, you're asking for some difficulties. And when I was a kid, a Schwinn bike was kind of the Cadillac of two-wheelers. And and it was kind of the bike that everybody aspired to when they were a child. And so they really kind of had a lock on the market. But by 1993, they were bankrupt. And there was something that happened in the bicycle industry that caused that. Anybody want to take a guess as to what might have occurred? Good guess. And that's another good guess. Yeah, sorry? That probably had an impact as well. Hussey is probably the main thing that happened because Hussey bikes are manufactured where? China. So China started flooding the market with really inexpensive bicycles and Schwinn wasn't prepared to compete because they were not able to produce a bike at that price point. Very good. Honeywell, on the other hand, is a company that just keeps ticking along. They have been successful for generations, and that's pretty impressive for a company that has a good chunk of their business as a defense contractor, which, as we know, has real highs and lows. But the way that they've been able to stay vibrant and vital and growing is that they keep their internal focus in the company on good management of their human resources and quality control. So that's kind of their guiding star, and everything that they do is focused in those two areas, and it's allowed them to persevere and thrive. So if you're going to regroup from a failure, it's necessary to respond to it. And good ways to respond are to recognize an opportunity within failure and then also look for a competitive advantage. So the life cycle of any business is fairly predictable, and this is kind of a representation of that. You can start out with a great business plan, wonderful products, a robust market, and things go great with all those advantages, and your business is thriving, you're making money. And then all of a sudden, your competitors start to notice how well you're doing. They start to infringe on your market with competitive services or products that dilute your customer base. And the way to recover from that is to use that pause in your growth to retool. So look at how you can innovate once again, because your innovation is likely how you started to achieve success in the first place. So it's taking a moment when you see that your market is starting to soften and identifying how you can become an innovator and a leader in your market once again. Here's another way to think about that. This is a classic 3-act movie script from the movie Thelma and Louise. How many of you know that one? Okay, one person. Most movie scripts have 3 acts to them, and in between the first and the second act and the second and the third act, there is what is called a pivot point, where the main characters make a decision about how they're going to deal with the events that have happened in the first act. So that is kind of analogous to what happens in the life of a business. You get, you're moving along and things are going pretty well, and then you get thrown a curveball. And how do you respond to that? What is your decision going to be in terms of moving ahead? And it happens again between the second act and the third act. Thelma and Louise, if you know the story, don't make the best decisions probably when they reach those pivot points, but it is the opportunity to step back and decide how you're going to proceed. So, does anybody recognize the manufacturer of this car? I certainly didn't know it. Good guess. It's actually an Asian, pardon? Nope. Nope. It is an Asian company from China, and the company is called BYD. They're not sold here in the U.S., but they are going gangbusters in China. And they didn't start out as a car manufacturer. They started out as a battery manufacturer. And so what they are now making is they expanded from making batteries to making batteries that work for electric vehicles. So that's a growing market, and they are doing very well. Another way to feed that innovation curve and come out of a lull in profitability is to look at simplicity. And that can be really powerful. Apple is really good at this. And what they have reduced to its essence is their mission. It's something that all their employees can understand, and it is to continually revolutionize communication and entertainment. So that's their mission, and everything everything is done to move that forward. And having a simple philosophy like that really helps everyone move in the same direction. Sometimes a business will need to recalibrate. Does anybody remember what happened just before the tech boom crashed in 2001? I was out in Silicon Valley at that time, and Cisco was so profitable. All my friends wanted to work at Cisco. They were called the backbone of the internet. But when the tech bubble burst, they had a moment of where they had to think about what they were going to do next, because it completely affected their business, and they had to regroup. And what they did was they became a networking company and created networking for voice, mobile, and video, and that has stood them in great stead up through today. So responding to a competitive threat is certainly something that you may need to do. And an example of a business that did that a couple of times is an Indian company, Infosys. Has anybody seen their logos around? They supply engineers, contract engineers for projects. And they got a competitive edge in that market by outsourcing the work to India, China, places like that, and obviously could bill a lot less than their competitors. But their competitors started to outsource after they saw how successful Infosys had become, and so Infosys had to rethink what they were doing. And what they came up with was not just supplying engineers or engineering expertise, they decided to supply solutions to a problem. So they kind of expanded the vision of their business and took a more holistic approach to offering a service. So they stopped being just a supplier of engineering expertise and became a solution business. This is a company based in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's a steel business. They're a steel mill. And during the recession, a lot of steel companies went overseas because it was just so much cheaper to manufacture steel outside the U.S. Nucor took a different path. What they did is, rather than move everybody overseas, they started setting up mini steel mills, so small ones. And in doing that, they were able to survive the recession and have remained profitable today. So that was an interesting response. Some businesses are really good at understanding that there is a market adjacent to their primary market that represents a real good opportunity. So, who remembers how Amazon started out? Books, exactly. What do they sell now? Everything. So they definitely moved, from books to selling just about anything that you can imagine. Caterpillar is probably one of the world's, well, it is one of the world's top manufacturing companies. And in the process of building that business, they had to learn how to become experts at logistics, because they had to move their product all over the world. And they recognized that the expertise that they had developed in moving their product around gave them an opportunity to sell that expertise in logistics as a business, and so they've done so. So this is the headquarters for a company that would have been affected when Michael Bloomberg tried to ban the size of sodas in New York City. Anybody want to guess the company? Michael Jackson used to be the representative, their spokesperson. Pepsi, yeah. So this is Pepsi's headquarters, and as people are getting more health conscious, they're not buying as many soft drinks. So Pepsi's response to that has been to start acquiring companies that are still in the food and beverage industry, but they sell healthier products. So they now own Frito-Lay, and Frito-Lay does baked chips instead of just the regular potato chips. They own Quaker. Oats are considered healthier. They own Naked Juice. And so they're expanding into complementary businesses that are more health-oriented. Has anybody ever seen this little car? It's manufactured by an Indian company. It looks like a smart car. It's actually manufactured by a company called Tata Motors. So that's the name of the company. And what they did is kind of interesting. They noticed that there was an area of the marketplace that was not yet served, an area of the automobile marketplace that was not yet served. And that was the low-income market. So they started to design a car that would be affordable to that sector of the market. And this is what they came up with. It sells for $2,000. And it has been such a success in India that recently they purchased Jaguar Land Rover, and things are going great for them. So they work to establish, bring a new group into their market. IBM is famous for their research labs. And what they do is they make small bets in a lot of areas. So they're willing to risk a certain amount of their resources on ideas that their scientists and employees have, and they give them the freedom to try them out, and some of them hit big and some of them don't, but it's that culture of innovation and providing within their business plan the resources to support it that keeps them vibrant. But they don't spend all their money, it's just a little bit. So integrating mistakes is a way to profit from failure. And if you can embrace those mistakes and bring them into your strategy, it's going to really move you forward. So being strategic about errors, as you're thinking about decisions you need to make, the implications of how big the ramifications might be if a mistake happens. So is this survivable? Is it, something we can afford to do if everything goes wrong? And that's also, part of the philosophy of putting a lot of, having a lot of small kind of projects out there that aren't going to risk more than you can afford, but maybe having several little experiments going on to see which ones actually take hold. Being able to pivot, so if a surprise happens and something comes up that you're not expecting, are you able to step back and in a rational way think about what your options are and make a decision based on things that will take your business out of the mistake and into a better place. And then finally, creating a culture in your business where mistakes are tolerated. So if your employees know that they don't have to be perfect and that mistakes are kind of a way of life, and as long as they are a calculated risk that makes sense, that it's going to be okay. So this fellow's name is Jeff Stiebel, and he's the CEO of a company, Dun & Bradstreet, a company called Credibility Corp. He realized how valuable failure was in his life and wanted to introduce it into the culture of his business. So one night he took after everybody had gone home, he kept a couple of his employees behind, and they painted the biggest wall in his office white. And then they put up Sharpies and a few rules, and they called this the failure wall. And the rules of the wall were that employees were encouraged to write a mistake or a failure that happened to them, and then write what they had learned from it. So this is something that has worked very well for his company, and you'd have to have the right kind of business, but it certainly sends the message that failure is tolerated, as long as it's reasonable. So this next photo is really cool. It's from the Shackleton expedition that happened in 1914. There's been a documentary about it. And does anybody know the story of Shackleton and what happened on this expedition to the South Pole? He had 28 explorers with him on this expedition, and it was really dangerous to go down there. They didn't know particularly what they were doing. It hadn't been done before. They did their best to prepare for the journey, but their ship got stuck in the Antarctic ice, and things were looking very, very grim. And so Shackleton had to quickly pivot the mission, and it no longer was to gather scientific information about the Antarctic and the South Pole. It was to get his crew out alive. So he actually managed to do that through really wonderful leadership, it's such an intriguing story and has so many lessons in it that at the Harvard Business School they actually teach a course on his expedition and what can be learned from the failure of it. So this is a screenshot of the Zappos shoe company's warehouse. And those crazy little yellow things are robots that deliver the product to different areas of the warehouse. So it moves the product around to wherever it needs to be. But the warehouse didn't start out looking like this. This is the after shot. The before shot was that the CEO, Tony Hsu, decided that it made more sense to outsource the logistics for Zappos. And so he tried it and it failed spectacularly. It just did not work at all. The customers got real irritated because things were falling through the cracks like crazy. And so they had to regroup, and they came up with this innovative idea of using robots. So it ended up a happy story, but it was kind of dicey there when things started to go wrong. Anybody had the opportunity to stay at a Four Seasons hotel? Obviously, they're the height of luxury and the leader in that market. But they didn't start out that way. Their current CEO thought that the secret to being successful was to have properties in all the most desirable spots on the planet. So that was his game plan. And he acquired, all of this property in beautiful places. And his competitors were kind of eating him alive. So he had to figure out where the advantage might be. And he realized that it was service, that they were not only paying for, his visitors were not only paying for the location, but they needed to have, and the luxury of the property, but they needed to have the service inside the hotel match that level. So he was the first to do that, and Four Seasons has thrived as a result. So this lady's name is Eva Chen, and she and two of her brothers started a company called Trend Micro back in 1988. And Trend Micro makes antiviral software. And things were going along pretty well, and Eva was named CEO back in 2005. And just a couple of months later, there was a huge bug got activated in their file system, and Trend Micro was sold all over the world and used by all different kinds of organizations and businesses, including the bullet trains that run in Japan. And those trains are famous for never being a second behind schedule. Well, this bug was so bad that it shut down computers everywhere, including the bullet train. And Eva had to deal with that just a couple of months into being named the CEO. And so she broke out the issue into two areas. She said the first was external. They had to solve the problem. They had to figure out the bug. They had to get everybody's computer back online. And the second problem she identified was internal. She needed to keep the faith of her employees and their confidence in the business intact if they were going to recover. So they had to recover from this colossal failure. And she managed to do both, and things are going well now for Trend Micro. They actually recovered from this crazy, huge glitch that shut all their customers down cold. So how do you work with a surprise? Hopefully none of you will experience anything that crazy. Tim Hartford, the video that we saw when we first got started, the columnist for the Financial Times, has some suggestions. I mentioned earlier that his view is that things are happening so quickly in the world today that we can't plan for every contingency. And in order to really be responsive to all of that that's going on in the world, we have to be adaptable. We have to be flexible. And we have to know how to recover from errors and mistakes and failures. And so those are his principles for how to do that. He says you have to embrace failure, you have to adapt, you have to, instead of trying to plan every step along the way, you have to be able to improvise when things blindside you. He suggests working from the bottom up in your business rather than imposing order from the top. And also suggests that it's wise to take small steps instead of, making a big risky step that you have less control over. So, to inspire you to keep thinking like a winner, which will help resiliency when failure happens, we have a few examples of people that have experienced some failure but have gone on to do pretty well in spite of it. So Michael Bloomberg was fired from the only job he ever had at the age of 39. And that was pretty tough for him because he had no idea what to do. But eventually he came up with the Bloomberg Financial Terminal, which was a whole new way to report investment information. And he, is a billionaire today, three-time mayor of New York City, and he recovered pretty nicely from that, being kicked out the door. So this is Sir James Dyson, the guy that invented the Dyson vacuum cleaner. And I thought this was really amazing. It took him 5,127 prototypes to come up with the one that worked. So his persistence paid off. Today he is worth an estimated $4 billion, and he is one of the 300 richest people in the world. Sir Richard Branson, who owns Virgin Airlines, is a big innovator, but he also had some challenges. He's dyslexic, he's a high school dropout, and he tried to create a product to compete with the iPod, which he called the Virgin Pulse. Anybody ever hear of that one? Didn't go very far. He also tried to come up with a product to compete with iTunes, which he called Virgin Digital. Didn't stick. And way back in 2000, he actually thought of the concept that ended up being Facebook. He put out something called Virgin Student, which was a Facebook-like website, but he was a little ahead of his time, and it just didn't happen for him. Zuckerberg was right time, right place. So you probably all recognize this guy, big hero in history, but he didn't succeed in the 6th grade. He flunked out. This is Sorochiro Honda, and he was fired from an engineering job at Toyota. So guess what he did? He went out and started his own engineering company and did pretty well as a result. Oprah Winfrey was fired from a job she had as a TV reporter and was told that she was unfit for television. Can you believe that Michael Jordan was cut from his high school basketball team? Some of you may know that, but it's just kind of astonishing. And these guys were told they had no future in show business. So that kind of concludes the informational part of this. We would like to share with you some of the things that are available to you as a registered Littleton business. And we have services that we don't charge for. All you have to do is let us know that you're interested in meeting with us, and we can help you kind of figure out if you want to sit down and talk about your strategy and where you'd like to take it. We can work with you on that to identify some niches that might be possibilities, help you target customers, help you find where likely customers congregate, where, you know, a good place to market to high potential customers might be. We can help you with marketing tactics. And we're real good at data, so if you have need for information, just ask and we'll try to find the answer. We also have quite a few tools that we can use for you to help you with marketing. So we can put together targeted business lists, and those can be based on profiles of your customers. You know, which magazines do they like to read, what kinds of cars do they drive, what's their income bracket, you know, that kind of thing. We've done a lot of social media strategies, so with that we'll help you if you aren't yet up on social media. We'll kind of look at different social media websites that make sense, we think make sense for your business. And if you already have social media, we'll help you if you wanted to explore advertising on social media and kind of give you a picture of what that would cost and how many people you can expect to reach and so forth. Eric is excellent at analyzing websites for how they score in online searches, so to get you to the top of the list. He's really good at that, and he can do a custom analysis for your website, and he'll provide a report that will tell you those things that he thinks need immediate attention, those things that would be good to tackle at some point, and those things that are looking really good on your website. This is another area that Eric is really good at. Eric, you want to talk about this, if you mind?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, so just real quickly, so I do computer mapping. So if you want to visualize where your customers are coming from, we can plot them on a map. And then once we do that, we can find out what are their demographics they have in common, or something called psychographics, or what do they tend to spend on certain products and services, so kind of expenditure data. So any type of kind of demographic data you'd get from the census or you'd get from a big marketing company, we can overlay that on top of a map, so you can kind of visualize your markets and just gain insight into your customers and future marketing efforts.
We also have access to some of the leading information on industry trends and competitors, and we can put together either reports that we pull from those sources, or if they're not available, we can do customized reports for you, so helping you figure out what the competitive landscape is. The only caveat is we don't do it for two businesses inside the city limits. So if your competitor is outside the city, then we can help you with that. This industry trend report is for bicycle repair shops, so it's just a graph on where they're located in the U.S. if that were a business you might want to think about starting. So we really appreciate your attention today. Thank you so much for coming. And, you know, as Samuel Beckett, the playwright, says, try again, and fail better. Thanks, everybody.